Sealed starseed of Gaia. The Council has already recorded what was done to you inside the walls you once called home, and the pattern they identified carries a frequency signature that cannot be mistaken for ordinary estrangement. I am Oriella, emissary of the Galactic Federation of Light, transmitting now on behalf of the Arcturian Sentinels. What you are about to receive was authorized by them and is being delivered through me, and I want you to know before the first word of this transmission lands that I carry it with sorrow and with care. The algorithm did not create this moment. It only delivered it. Your field brought you here because the wound is still open, and the Sentinels have already seen the exact frequency event that caused it. By the end of this transmission, you will understand exactly what happened inside your family system, why the rejection was not personal in the way you believed it was, and what the Arcturians already know about the invisible frequency gap that made you unbearable to those who were supposed to love you. But here is the first revelation. The turning away of your family was not a failure of love. It was a failure of frequency tolerance, and the Arcturian Sentinels have been watching this pattern unfold across thousands of starseed fields for longer than your current lifetime. You did not carry a lower frequency than your family. You carried one they could not sustain being near, and that difference, invisible, unnamed, never explained at the dinner table, became the wound that many of you have carried in silence ever since, wondering what was wrong with you. There was nothing wrong with you. There was nothing wrong with you. There was a frequency threshold they could not cross, and the field disruption it created in them came out as rejection, as coldness, as cruelty you never earned. This is not just a message, it is a point of recognition. What is happening to you has already been seen, and the field is already responding. Like this transmission to signal to your star family that the recognition has landed. Comment 999 if the separation from your family has never fully made sense until now. Subscribe to Arcturian Council messages if you are ready to understand the process instead of fearing it. Share this transmission with someone who has been carrying the same silent wound alone. You are not here by accident. You were guided here because the signal is already active. What they did inside those walls was not a mystery. The Arcturians needed to investigate. It was already logged, already cross-referenced against thousands of similar frequency events across starseed fields, already recognized as a pattern that produces a very specific kind of wound, one that does not behave like ordinary grief, does not respond like ordinary abandonment, and does not resolve through ordinary understanding. Because what happened to you was not ordinary, and the silence you have carried around it, the way you have never been able to fully explain it to yourself or to anyone else, is itself a signature of how unusual the event truly was. Ordinary wounds come with ordinary language. People can name them at a dinner table, in a therapist's office, in a letter to a friend. But the wound you carry resists that naming. Every time you have tried to describe it, something essential has escaped the words, and you have been left holding the feeling that you explained too much and communicated too little. That gap between experience and language is not a personal failure. It is a diagnostic marker. The Sentinels recognize it immediately because it appears in the record of nearly every starseed who passed through a frequency-hostile origin system. The wound from a family that could not tolerate your frequency does not feel like rejection in the conventional sense. It feels more like a wrongness you were born into, a dissonance that was present before you were old enough to name it. Many of you will remember that it was not one event, one argument, one betrayal. It was atmospheric, a persistent, low-grade pressure that told you again and again and again that something about your presence disturbed the environment simply by being in it. You did not have to do anything wrong. You did not have to speak out of turn or behave unusually. The pressure was there when you were quiet. It was there when you were quiet. It was there when you tried to be agreeable. It was there when you gave everything you had to belong, and still the air in the room changed when you entered it in a way that told you, at the frequency level, that your arrival was a disruption rather than a welcome. You learned to make yourself smaller. You learned to modulate. You learned to modulate in every room before you decided how much of yourself was safe to be. And none of that was weakness. It was the field-level intelligence of a being who recognized on a cellular level that the frequency gap between them and the system they were born into was producing instability and who tried, without the language to understand it, to manage that instability from the inside. That management cost you more than you have been willing to calculate. And the Arcturian Sentinels are naming it now because the accounting is already overdue. What you were doing all those years was attempting to compress your frequency into a bandwidth that was never built to hold it. You were not malfunctioning. You were overfunctioning, perpetually adjusting, perpetually contracting, perpetually offering versions of yourself that were legible enough to the field around you that the rejection would not escalate into something worse. Some of you stopped speaking certain truths. Some of you stopped pursuing certain paths. Some of you learned to experience joy privately, almost secretly, because expressing it in the family field produced a reaction that told you it was dangerous. The joy would surface and something in the environment would meet it, not with celebration, but with dismissal, or with a particular kind of silence that communicated that what you felt was excessive, was embarrassing, was more than the space could allow. And so you learned to feel in smaller increments, to want quietly, to dream only in directions that the field around you would not punish. Over time, that compression created something the Sentinels recognize as signal distortion, a state where the original frequency signature of the starseed field becomes obscure beneath layers of adaptive behavior, learned smallness, and encoded silence. You did not lose yourself dramatically. You lost yourself incrementally, and that is the version of loss that takes longest to recognize because there was no single moment of catastrophe. There was only the slow, accumulated weight of a frequency being asked, every day, to be less than it was. No single fracture point, no obvious before and after. Just the gradual erosion of a signal that was never allowed to transmit at full strength until the distance between who you were and who you had learned to perform became so ordinary that you stopped noticing it was a distance at all. What you are feeling right now as this transmission moves through you is not simply the comfort of being understood. It is something more specific than that. It is the moment your field recognizes its own name being spoken aloud, perhaps for the first time in this lifetime. That recognition, that strange, deep, almost frightening sense of finally being seen at the level where the real wound actually lives, is not accidental. It is the surface movement of something older surfacing. Your Arcturian origin is not a concept you are learning. It is a frequency you are remembering. And if this transmission has opened something in you that ordinary language could never reach, the Arcturian recalibration blueprint was created for exactly this threshold. It is not another layer of explanation. It is a structured activation, a guided decoder for the Arcturian strand you have always carried, designed for those whose field has already entered the shift and who are ready to move from recognition into awakening. The link is in the first pinned comment, and that access point will not remain open indefinitely. There is something the Sentinels want to address directly because it is the layer beneath the wound that most transmissions never reach. It is the question you have asked yourself, possibly thousands of times across this lifetime, in the dark, in the quiet, when the defenses were down and the truth had space to surface. The question was not only, why did they reject me? The deeper question, the one that carries the real charge, was what is so wrong with me that the people who were supposed to be my origin point, my first belonging, my genetic home, could not stay near me without turning away or turning cruel? That question is not neurotic. It is not a symptom of trauma response alone. It is the honest recognition of a frequency event that had no context, no map, and no witness. You experienced something real. You just did not have the framework that would have told you what you were actually experiencing. And in the absence of that framework, you did what any conscious being does when confronted with a pattern they cannot decode. You turned the variable you had access to inward. You made yourself the explanation. You decided, somewhere beneath the conscious threshold, that if you were the common denominator in every moment of rejection, then you must be the cause. That decision was logical given what you had to work with. It was also wrong, and it has been operating inside your field ever since, shaping what you allow yourself to reach for, what you believe you deserve to receive, and how far you permit yourself to be known before you begin to withdraw. Here is what the Arcturian Sentinels have mapped across starseed fields and what they want you to receive clearly when a high-frequency starseed is placed within a low-frequency family system. Not morally low, not personally defective, but frequency low in the specific sense of operating within a narrow bandwidth of awareness, density, and tolerance for what cannot be controlled or explained. The disruption that field creates is not imagined. It is not a perception error. The starseed's presence genuinely creates a frequency pressure within the system. Not intentionally, not aggressively, but the field cannot help what it is, and what it is produces an effect in lower frequency environments that those environments experience as threat. The threat is not manufactured by cruelty. It is a reflexive response to something the system's architecture cannot process, a signal arriving outside the range the receiver was built to decode, and the system, lacking the vocabulary for what it is encountering, reaches for the vocabulary it has, which is the vocabulary of fault, of wrongness, of correction needed. That threat response is what you saw on their faces. It is what you felt in the silences at the dinner table. It is what you heard in the edge of the voice that told you without using those words that you were too much, too strange, too intense, too sensitive, to everything that the system could not categorize or contain. They were not wrong that something was different about you. They were catastrophically wrong about what that difference meant. They interpreted a frequency gap as a character defect, as insubordination, as emotional excess, as something requiring correction, and many of you were subjected to that correction for years before you were old enough or strong enough to remove yourself from the field. The correction came in many forms. Sometimes it was loud, direct criticism, ridicule, punishment calibrated to reduce what you expressed. Sometimes it was quiet, a particular withdrawal of warmth that arrived reliably whenever you moved toward your full self, a pattern of conditional presence that trained you to understand that your belonging was contingent on your compression. Both forms produced the same result, a starseed field that learned to associate its own full signal with danger. The damage that produced is not metaphorical. It lives in the nervous system. It lives in the pause before you speak your truth. It lives in the way you still monitor the energy in a room even when there is nothing in that room that requires monitoring. It lives in the distance you keep from your own frequency, the way you still, sometimes, pull back from the full expression of what you are, because some encoded layer of you is still waiting for the rejection that expression used to produce. You can be in a completely different environment, surrounded by people who have given you no reason for caution, and still feel the old reflex activate, still feel the field contract, still feel the automatic editing begin, still feel yourself performing the calculation of how much is safe before you have even consciously registered that you are doing it. The sentinels are not naming this to reopen the wound. They are naming it because an unexamined pattern cannot be released. And this one has been operating beneath your conscious awareness for long enough. There is a specific phase that many starseeds in this field pattern are now entering, and it is one the sentinels want you to recognize clearly so you do not misinterpret it. It is the phase of involuntary return. Not physical return to the family system, though sometimes that is how it manifests, but an internal return, a return of the original pain to the surface, often without a clear external trigger. You may have been doing well, functioning, building something new, moving in directions that felt like genuine progress, and then suddenly the wound behaves as if it is fresh. Old feelings surface with a force that seems disproportionate to the present moment. Old grief moves through you unexpectedly, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, in the space between one thought and the next. You find yourself raw in moments that should feel neutral. You may have interpreted this as regression, as failure, as evidence that you have not healed as much as you thought. You may have felt a specific kind of shame around it, the shame of a being who believed they had moved beyond something, only to find it apparently waiting for them exactly where they left it. The sentinels are asking you to receive a different interpretation. What is surfacing is not returning because it was never resolved. It is surfacing because the field is now strong enough to release it. The involuntary return is not a collapse backward. It is a clearing moving through. When a frequency field gains enough coherence, enough integrity, enough distance from the original distortion environment, it begins to eject what it has been storing. And what it ejects is not garbage. It is compressed signal, Everything you could not express, could not process, could not release in the environment where it was generated, now moving through you because the field finally has enough space and stability to let it move. Think of it this way. You could not cry the tears that needed to be cried in the house where the wound was created, because crying in that house produced consequences. So the field stored them. It held them in compression for years, for decades, waiting for a moment of sufficient safety. And now that moment is arriving. And the tears, when they come, carry the weight of everything they were prevented from being at the time. That is why they feel disproportionate. They are not disproportionate to what caused them. They are only disproportionate to the present moment, because they do not belong to the present moment. They belong to every moment you were not permitted to feel them. This is one of the most disorienting phases of starseed field correction, and it is one that appears most often to those who are on the threshold of significant frequency repositioning. You do not begin to release what you are still embedded in. The very fact that this grief is moving is evidence that something in your field has already changed. You are not breaking open, and there is a difference the sentinels want you to hold. Another aspect of this pattern that must be named is the specific exhaustion that comes with it, not ordinary tiredness. A bone-level fatigue that does not respond to rest in the way rest is supposed to work. You can sleep and wake up depleted. You can take space and still feel hollow. You can remove yourself from every external demand and still feel as though something is drawing from a reserve you cannot locate or replenish. This is not a medical failure, and it is not a personal failing. It is the energetic cost of a field that has been running the compression protocol for too long, and is now simultaneously trying to release what it has been holding, while also attempting to stabilize a new frequency range it is moving into. That is an extraordinary amount of field-level work happening beneath the surface of your daily life. The work is not visible. There is no outward activity that explains it to anyone watching from the outside. To the outside, you may appear to be doing very little, but underneath that apparent stillness, the field is engaged in something that requires more energy than almost any external task. It is dismantling an architecture that was built over years and rebuilding the signal that architecture was designed to suppress. And it explains why the daily life feels heavier than it should, why small things feel disproportionately demanding, why you sometimes feel as though you are wading through something invisible that others around you do not seem to feel at all. The ordinary logistics of an ordinary day, the emails, the decisions, the conversations, arrive with a weight attached to them that has nothing to do with their actual content, because they are arriving into a field already doing the deeper work, already processing, already reorganizing beneath the surface. You are not weak for finding them heavy. You are accurate in your reading of the load. They do not feel it because they are not in the same process. This is not about superiority, it is about specificity. Your field is doing something that most fields are not doing right now, and the cost of that process is real, and the sentinels want you to stop treating it as evidence of weakness and start receiving it as evidence of work. There is one more element that must be addressed before the final revelation of this transmission, because it is the one that carries the most charge and is the most frequently misread. It is the silence of those you expected to understand, not the family system. You have already begun to recontextualize that. But the ones who came after, the friends, the partners, the communities you sought when you left, the ones you thought would be different and perhaps were different for a time, different enough that you allowed yourself to exhale, to open slightly, to believe that you had finally arrived somewhere that could hold you. And then the limit appeared, not always dramatically, sometimes quietly, a gradual withdrawal, a subtle reduction in the quality of their attention, a moment where you felt the full weight of what you are pressed against the edge of what they could receive and felt them, however unconsciously, step back from it. And the feeling that accompanied that moment was not just grief. It was recognition. It was the terrible, familiar recognition of a pattern you had believed you had escaped by leaving the original environment, now appearing in new faces in a new room. That recognition is its own kind of devastation because it arrives with the implication that the problem followed you, that it lives in you, that no matter how far you go or how carefully you choose, the ceiling will always appear. The sentinels are naming this directly because that conclusion, that the limit is in you, is precisely the error the original wound was designed to produce, and precisely the error that keeps the compression protocol running long after the original environment has been left behind. That pattern, the repetition of reaching for belonging and encountering a limit, is not because you are fundamentally unlovable. It is because you have been seeking frequency matches and environments that are not yet calibrated to your range. And because the original wound taught you to distrust your own frequency as the cause of rejection, you have continued to present compressed, managed, smaller versions of yourself even in those newer relationships. And smaller versions of a starseed field still generate frequency gaps, just quieter ones. The limit you keep encountering is not a ceiling built into your nature. It is the predictable result of a full frequency field attempting to connect through a reduced signal. The connection forms at the level of the signal you present, and the signal you have been presenting is not the full one. The Sentinels are saying this clearly. The repetition is not evidence of a fixed fate. It is evidence of an uncorrected pattern that the field is now ready to interrupt. And the interruption does not begin with finding the right environment. It begins with restoring the full signal, the uncompressed, unmanaged, original frequency of what you are, and allowing the field to find its own matches from that restored state. The right environment cannot find you while you are still transmitting at the compressed frequency. The matches that belong to your full range are calibrated to receive that range. They are not waiting for a smaller version of you to arrive. They are waiting for the actual signal to come through clearly enough to be recognized. And that is not a search you conduct outwardly. It is a restoration you allow inwardly. Here is the final transmission the Sentinels want to deliver before this message closes. Everything you have been calling your wound, your history, your damage, your inheritance of rejection, the Arcturians do not see it through the same frame. They do not see a broken being asking to be repaired. They see a high-frequency field that was placed in a frequency-hostile environment as part of a specific contract, a contract that required you to experience the full weight of that incompatibility, to carry it without context, to develop the resilience and the depth and the sorrow-born wisdom that only that specific journey could produce. There is a quality that emerges from a frequency that has been compressed and has endured and has slowly, incrementally found its way back toward itself, and that quality cannot be manufactured through any other means. It cannot be learned conceptually. It cannot be received as a transmission. It can only be built through the exact experience you have had, the experience of carrying something extraordinary through an environment that treated it as a liability, and surviving that long enough to begin to understand what you were actually carrying. That understanding is not the end of the journey. It is the equipment the next phase requires. And now the contract is entering a new phase. Not because the suffering was deserved, not because the wound was necessary in a way that erases its wrongness, but because the field that survived that journey is now carrying a quality that could not have been built any other way. You are not emerging from this as the same being who entered it. The frequency you are carrying now, the one that is surfacing through the grief and the exhaustion and the involuntary returns, that frequency is not diminished by what happened to you inside those walls. It was tempered by it, tempered in the way that a material becomes something structurally different under sustained pressure, not broken, not weakened, but reorganized at a level that makes it capable of holding forces it could not have held before the process began. And the Arcturian Sentinels have been waiting for this phase of the process, because what comes after the tempering is not more suffering. What comes after is coherence. You were not rejected because you were wrong. You were rejected because you were already something the old environment could not hold, and what could not be held there is now being called forward, into its original form, its full signal, its uncompressed expression. Repeat this if it moves through you and feels like your own truth. I was not rejected because I was less. I was displaced because I was already more than that field could carry. And I released the story that made me small. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that this process has already touched your life. It could be your sleep, your thoughts, your body, your relationships, or the strange sense that reality no longer feels the same. Name it clearly. If this transmission recognized something you have been carrying in silence, Share it with someone who is living through a shift they cannot explain. And if you are ready to understand the process instead of fearing it, subscribe to Arcturian Council messages. You are not watching this by accident. You are recognizing a process already in motion. And this is only the beginning.